Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the podcast, where today Toby and I are discussing all things Tottenham Hotspur, what's been going on with them this season, what's been going on with Thomas Frank, and what they should be doing for the rest of the season and going forward after that. So Toby, what were your thoughts going into the season? What were your expectations for Spurs, and how well do you think they've done so far?
Yeah, it's quite easy, I think, with Spurs to say it's been a pretty underwhelming start to the season, in the Premier League at least. But then I think you also do have to compare it to how they performed in the Premier League last season, finishing 17th on only 38 points, which could, in a really unlucky season, even get you relegated. Obviously, the expectations coming into this season are going to be significantly better than that, and the goal for Spurs is ultimately to get into the Champions League. They are one of the top six clubs. That's what they're going to be pushing for. And currently they are only 9 points off of it, despite sitting in 14th place. So it's been a really difficult season, I think, to judge it based on league position. But I still think even that, despite the gap maybe not being too big, it does feel like it has been really disappointing for Spurs, especially following their summer, the appointment of Frank, and that I think this season we were expecting a lot more of a jump up from Spurs as opposed to a very minor one, almost a plateau compared to last season.
Yeah, I was definitely expecting something better than what we've seen so far. I mean, 22 games in and 14th place in the Premier League. That is simply based on just league form, not good enough in my opinion. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect of them going into the season because, like you said, they did finish 17th. So I'm not entirely sure that if I was maybe expecting them to get Champions League places, I was definitely expecting them to probably at least get Europa League places, maybe in around that 6th or 7th, maybe as an outside chance challenging for the top 4 or 5, depending on those Champions League places. But I've been really disappointed, I think, so far this season, and I'm not quite sure about my read on Tottenham and Thomas Frank because going into the season, I thought Tottenham had a really good squad. Going into the season, I thought Thomas Frank is a really good manager with the ideas and philosophies that could make Spurs a better team in this season. And I've seen what he's trying to do, and the execution of it on the pitch has been really, really poor. And I'm just questioning everything I know about football because I think Thomas Frank is a good manager. I think Spurs have some very good players, but it's just not quite gelling right now. And I'll throw it to you. Do you have any explanation for why do you think that's been happening on the pitch so far this season?
I'm not too sure because it feels like it's not just that they're not scoring enough goals or not creating enough chances. It's not just that they're probably conceding too many. It feels like it's almost over the whole team at the moment that it's just not gelling. I think they have been hit pretty badly by injuries, and I think injuries to really key players. I think Maddison has been really missed this season, as well as Kulusevski, who are probably their two most creative players, and two of their best performers last season. And even I think when you look back to what would you could say was their last good Premier League season in 23-24, their top 5 performers according to SofaScore, 3 of those are not here this season, which has been Son Heung-min, Maddison and Kulusevski. And even if you look at their top 5 goals and assists for that season, 4 of the top 5 are not there, which was those 3 previously mentioned players and Brennan Johnson, who has now gone to Crystal Palace. And I think that despite it sort of being overruled, I think Spurs haven't been good enough. Their creativity, I think, has been the main one that I think has really kept them from pushing on. And their XG numbers are super low. Their chances created are super low, especially in comparison to the league. And I think they are missing some quality in that area, whether that's down to injury or their squad or how Tottenham are playing. I guess it's a combination of all of those, really.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the XG numbers there. I mean, based on XG, they're 17th in the Premier League from scoring 31 goals. So I think I didn't expect their attack to be so bad this season. I did think there was going to be a little bit of a drop-off in the attack because if we're generalising a little bit, I thought that under Ange Postecoglou, Spurs' attack was really good and the defence was quite poor. And I thought Thomas Frank was going to come in and the attack numbers were maybe going to get a little bit worse. But in terms of results and points, that was going to improve because the margin of difference in the defence that he was going to make an improvement in would total in Spurs being in a better position in the league. And that's not happened. So in what we've seen is Spurs' attack has got worse, and then defense hasn't improved that much either. And so you got that to worry about, and then you no longer have your attacking play, which was, I think, at times last season good, not throughout the whole season because Spurs were quite poor all last season as well. But now that there's no improvement really in any certain areas, and I'm looking at Thomas Frank and thinking to myself, what's he working on a weekly basis? What's he trying to do? And is it the right thing for these Spurs players? Because I do still think that I agree that Spurs, are very much missing Kulusevski, Madison, Solanke up until he just recently returned, some of their most crucial attacking players and creative players. But they still have the likes of Xavi Simons, who, yes, has struggled to acclimatise to the Premier League. They still have Mohamed Kudus, who unfortunately is injured. You've got very young, talented players like Bergval, Odegaard. I mean, Richarlison is an experienced Premier League player as well. You've still got Matisse Tell, who seems to be on the fringes. Randa Kolomuani. These are players who cost a lot of money for Spurs. And when I think about those players, I then always come back to Thomas Frank and going, can you get the best out of them? And that's an issue that I'm having right now, is because yes, maybe the team isn't performing well, and so as a result, they're playing within themselves to maybe try and focus on getting results, which isn't working, which is annoying for Spurs and Spurs fans. But at the same time, you have players who can make it better. So, what's the compromise? What's Thomas Frank trying to work on? And I need to see more of that and see it more in the attacking sense, because I don't think that being effective from set pieces and being really good at long throws is enough to excite the Spurs fans who are used to and have lived on for several years of we are Spurs, we play attacking football. To not have that, even when they're doing badly, I think it's more of a double blow, and I think that just goes to hamper Spurs fans' spirit more than anything else.
Yeah, and that having a lack of an attack as well, I think is a lot worse when you're playing badly as opposed to having a poor defence. And I think we saw that under Ange, that even last season, down in 17th, not playing well, you could still think, we still might get a few goals, which is good for the confidence, it's good for the fans, it's a little better for the atmosphere. Whereas now this season, when they're struggling going forward, it certainly feels like more of an issue and more for fans to complain about, which I think is just added fuel to the fire, really. And yeah, it's like you said with those XG numbers, super, super low. To be fair and to give some credit to the forwards, though, they're taking their chances absolutely fantastically. They're third for goals per shot in the league, and they're first for goals per shot on target, with the biggest XG performance of nearly 6. So Richarlison and Palhinha and Tell and their sort of top scorers this season are taking their chances so well, but they're just not making high enough quality chances and not making enough of them either in terms of actual numbers as well. So yeah, that's something that's got to be improved, and I'm not sure how much sort of burden the attacking and creative players can take on that. And maybe it's Spurs as a whole, and like you said, what Frank's trying to do as a whole, it's preventing them from creating too many chances. And I also think it's also hampering their defence in certain ways as well. That it seems like the whole way the squad is playing and they're trying to build up for attacks is almost like hampering as well, because they're not having particularly high possession in games. They're not winning the ball back high, and they're not maintaining the ball high up on the pitch as well. And I think the way they're trying to build out from the back and create these chances by starting low and having their defenders push forward with the ball, run forward with the ball, play creative sort of line cutting passes, it's hampering them in that chance creation area, but also as a whole. So like you said, I think there's a lot of areas that Frank needs to look at that's sort of causing this chance creation problem.
Yeah, I also think that Spurs aren't that great on the counter-attack either, which is something that I think Brentford, when he was there, was a real trademark and something they were excellent at and thrived at. I just don't see Spurs, when they get the opportunities, to try and counter-attack, because I think that maybe Thomas Frank is asking his players to maybe be a bit more conservative because he's worried about that defence so much that he's not focusing on the attack. And then when Spurs even do have the ball and they're in possession and they're in the opposition's half, they're passing it round the back slowly. And then when they do get the ball into wide areas and those wide players do have space, they're then crossing it into the box, and they're not getting the bodies into the box. They're not getting the winger from the other side. They're not getting a midfield runner in. And normally it ends up being just the striker or the number 9 in there. And you think to yourself, well, that's not enough in the Premier League when you got at least two, sometimes three centre backs in there, plus the full backs, plus a midfielder as well. You're just giving the centre forward no chance of being able to compete for that ball because he's surrounded by 5 or 6 players and he's outnumbered. So I think it is all a bit slow, and I've seen some Spurs fans saying that one of the problems that they have and one of the ways to fix it is they need to create more through the middle and they need to be a bit, have some better passing through the middle and they need a deep lying playmaker. And they were a bit bemused when they signed Conor Gallagher because while he's a very good and talented midfielder, he's not maybe the right kind of profile for that deep lying midfielder. But I think we saw in midweek against Borussia Dortmund, we saw the two of Bergvall and Archie Gray, and the two very young players, two players that I'm hesitant on putting too much responsibility on because of the fact that you don't want to break them before you make them. But they did look much better in that game. But like we said, it's the Champions League rather than the Premier League. And so how much stock do you actually put into that? Where you see on a weekly basis that Gray and Bergvall have had good performances, but they haven't been able to match them physically. So I think there is some potential. There are some signs that maybe Thomas Frank could get something or even better out of the Spurs team. But I'd have to say the clock is ticking on him, really.
Yeah, and it still feels in a way like he's trying things out. And like you say, with sort of Gray and Bergvall, playing without Palhinha in there gives you a completely different style of play. I think when you have Palhinha, you've got Porro, Romero, Van der Ven, and whoever their left back is on the day. Without Palhinha, he's a very simple footballer, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as he is winning the ball back and then playing a simple pass and letting somebody else do that sort of more attacking work. And I think when you've got Palhinha in there, maybe that responsibility falls a little bit more on the defence to do that, which I think can cause issues for Spurs' defence. Whereas when you've got somebody or two players like Gray and Bergvall there picking up the ball from the defenders and doing that sort of carrying, driving, passing forward, it certainly works better. But then you look at the other side where maybe they have less cover in there, and Bergvall and Gray are not great defensively, especially when compared to Palhinha. And yeah, Frank trying things out, trying to find a good balance that works, and maybe not having quite the right profiles in there, or even the right formation potentially. If you can look at maybe having like a Palhinha, a Bergvall, or a Gray, and then a third midfielder in there who, less like Xavi Simons, who is more of that pure 10, almost a second striker at times. You have somebody like a Kulusevski or a Maddison who's a bit more comfortable dropping in deeper and picking the ball up from there. And they just haven't found that balance at all in that midfield this season with injuries, with personnel change, with tactical changes. And like you said, as good as Frank needs to try these things out and he needs to think of it long term in what the sort of play style and the lineup is going to look for Spurs, he's got to start getting results soon. Otherwise, he's not going to get the opportunity to be able to set up for that in the future.
No, he's absolutely not. He's got to get results now. And I think that's why the Dortmund result in midweek was a really good run for him, because it was at home. And in the league last season, Spurs only had 4 wins at home from 18. So that horrible 2025 at home was really, I think, a big problem for Spurs last season and has carried on to this season. I think the woes are carried on as well, because to be playing at home and then your home fans are constantly seeing you not win games of football, it's a little bit different, I think, if it's your away fans, because I think they're a bit more of a hardcore section and they're willing to travel and they just want to see, I think at the very minimum they just want to see some fight. But at home you're more expected, especially as Spurs, who are one of the big 6 sides, to get wins and to do it in a comfortable manner, play attacking style of football. So that win in midweek was really good. But I think the weekend just gone, when they played West Ham at home, that was a very, very bad result, if we're being completely honest. That was one where we highlighted it actually. We were talking off camera before going into the weekend, thinking to ourselves, mate, if he loses that game, he's going to be in some trouble. And there has been a lot of talk about Thomas Frank and whether he should stay or go. And I'm surprised, I'll be honest, that after the West Ham game, Spurs didn't sack him, because I thought to myself, the way they performed, they played better in the second half. And I thought to myself, okay, they're playing okay here. But the issue is that okay is based on the performances they've had all season. And the bar is so low right now that I thought to myself, actually, that's a decent second half performance. When actually, in a normal situation, that's really, it's not acceptable, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, at home against West Ham, who have been so poor this season, you expect to blow them out the water. That's what they should have done. That's what like a Arsenal, Liverpool, City generally would be doing, and Tottenham to get that result feels a way off. And yeah, that home form has just been dreadful, isn't it? 9 points, 17th in the league for home games with a record of 2 wins, 3 draws, and 6 losses. So losing over 50% of their games at home is not good enough, and that's where teams need to pick up most of their points. And it's great that Spurs are second in the league for away results with 18 points. But that 18 points, if you compare that to home points won by teams in the Premier League, is sort of like mid-table-ish. And teams at home are picking up significantly more points. And Tottenham not having that to bolster that away form is a huge loss. And I think it also contributes to what we were saying earlier in terms of the fan reaction and the atmosphere at the club. Not having a good home form has been really detrimental, with not scoring goals, bad home form, confusion over how they're playing, who's playing. It's not even like they have that side off the pitch, which can help at all.
I've seen some Spurs fans talking about this. I can understand, obviously, they're not entirely happy with the results at the moment. The performances, either with Thomas Frank, the players, the board, everyone at the club. But I've seen some of them say they think that, considering the fact they finished 17th last season, they're 14th this season, what is the actual quality of the Spurs side? Because we know that on their day, they are a very good side, but we just haven't seen that very often. I mean, we saw it right at the beginning of the season. They took Paris Saint-Germain to penalties in the... what's the name of the trophy? I always
European
forget random
Super Cup.
things. What was that?
Is it the European Super Cup or
The Super
on
Cup.
those
The Super
lines?
Cup. Yeah, the Super Cup. I just always forget random things during the podcast. The Super Cup, yeah. They took PSG to penalties. They won the first game at home, I think it was comfortably. And then they beat Man City away 2-0. And then you thought to yourself, oh my God,
Yep.
Thomas Frank's a genius. This Spurs side are amazing. But then now, after the run they've been on, they've looked like they deserve, well, and they have deserved to be exactly where they are right now. So where do you... I think it's clear that they have a ceiling, which is quite high, but they have a floor, which is also very, very low. So where's the truth in that, do you think? Where do you think, like, how good are Spurs actually?
Yeah, I didn't want to say straight away that I maybe disagreed with you saying that they have a very good squad and they can be a very good side, because I think actually their squad is pretty poor. They have, again, this is injuries to Madison, Kulusevski, and Kudus, who I think are probably their strongest players outside of their defence. I just think their attack is not good enough. I don't particularly rate Mateus Tel, Kolomoani, or Odegaard super high at the moment. I think Odegaard is somebody who has a really good potential, but just does not feel good enough at the moment. Their midfield behind again, like missing, feels like they're missing Benton Kerr, and that the players who are stepping in instead of him just aren't quite the right profile. I just think that attacking firepower and that maybe that fear factor that Spurs used to have in their attack when they had Son and Kane, I think the drop since then is really, really big. And I don't feel like in the last 2 or 3 seasons that people are particularly fearful of coming up to face Spurs, especially in an attacking sense. In their defence, I think they have a really strong backline in some aspects. Looking at Poro and Udogie are so good on the ball. Romero and Van de Ven the same, and on their day can be so good. And despite that quality, their defence is just so inconsistent and so prone to mistakes and prioritising attacking. I think the defenders are almost better at attacking than they are at defending a lot of the time. So yeah, that would be my summary of the squad and where that would place them in the league. I think, like you said at the start, they should realistically be aiming for sort of 8th. I think they probably have the 7th or 8th best squad in the league. And that should sort of be maybe the expectation, whereas top 4 is probably a little bit more unrealistic.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with the assessment there. I think at the very minimum, they should be at least a top 10 side, a top half side. And the fact that they're not, and they haven't been really since what, Christmas of last season, really, since they started going on this terrible run in 2025. They haven't really been anywhere near that. And I think that's where I think the frustration from Spurs fans comes from, because you think to yourself, we've been bad for so long. Is this now the new norm for Spurs rather than just a small underperformance for a short period of time? Because for a year, maybe a season and a half, that is a very long time to be not that great and be in the bottom half of the Premier League table. And I do agree. I do think that maybe that the replacement for, I think especially for Heung-min Son, weren't as good as they needed to be. Yes, they brought in young players with potential, but with the potential often comes inconsistency and performances which are up and down. And as a result, then that leads to bad performances, and then that doesn't necessarily lead you to getting the points that you need as well. Because Heung-min Son, on his day, was a world-class footballer. Yes, he definitely dropped off towards the back end of his time at Spurs, but he was still someone you could rely on to start the majority of games. And even when he did come on as a substitute, he was still performing and doing really well, and it was a threat for the opposition that had to mark him really, really well. And I do agree. I don't see a massive threat in the Spurs attack. I mean, think about the strikers they've had throughout the years. I mean, the likes of Kane, obviously, but even before that, like Berbatov, Defoe, Crouch, before that, like Sheringham, Klinsmann. I think they've had some fantastic strikers, and I just, maybe they need like one star forward right now if they can try and get someone and just build the attack around them. I don't know who it would be. I mean, I think Kudos is a good player. I think that I think Solanke is a good player, but maybe are they players who are more like between 6th and 10th rather than between 1 and 6th? I mean, who else in the top 6 are taking Spurs as attacking players? I guess is a good thought exercise. I'm not sure how many players are actually getting into those sides.
Yeah, and I don't blame Spurs for the sort of approach they've had in transfer windows in
Not at
terms
all.
of signing players like Kudus and Simmons and Odegaard, who are good players, potentially even great players at the moment, but also have that potential, as opposed to going out and buying world class top tier players. And I think maybe there's that adjustment period between having world class players like Kane and Son and having to drop down in approach to getting more value for money, getting a longer term project, as opposed to just, okay, we've sold Kane, now let's go buy another 28, 29-year-old striker who is one of the best in Europe, because that's not a sustainable model to have either, because at that point you may as well have just kept Kane, you know? So yeah, I think there is definitely evidence of a what was a potential reliance on Kane and Son. And I think even if Spurs only had one of those, as we saw where sort of that last season where it was just Son, the partnership that they had and that both of them were able to create, both of them were able to score, and now it feels like they don't really have any players who are particularly strong at doing both of those things. I think you have somebody like Solanke and Richarlison who have been very good finishers for them so far this season, but would need support from players around them. And then you look at players like Odegaard and Xavi Simons who are a lot more creative but aren't really getting enough goals for themselves. And where all of these goals and assists need to come from, there doesn't feel like at the moment there's a player that Spurs are really looking to for that. And that change is pretty evident this season.
Well, I think it was basically Mohamed Kudus until his injury, where it was he wasn't doing great in terms of goals and assists, but he was chipping in here and there, and he looked like one of their most threatening forward players. And you've actually, talking about replacing Son and Kane, you actually made me go back and think about Spurs in the past, about how they tried to replace Gareth Bale. And I was trying to think about it. What players did they sign to replace Gareth Bale? And I'm thinking about myself, like, Soldado's a striker, maybe Eric Lamela, I think he was one as well. I think they had a midfielder, Paulinho, the Brazilian midfielder, and they ended up not investing wisely, using that Bale money and getting the replacements that they needed. And I'm thinking to myself, with the Harry Kane money, yes, they bought in Solanke, they got Richarlison, and they got a couple of other players as well. But I'm now, over a long period of time, I'm now really like looking at the Spurs hierarchy and the recruitment and questioning, well, not just over a long period of time, but for basically as long as I've been a football fan, I've been basically questioning Spurs' recruitment and thinking, are they good enough at recruiting? And for a long time, I've been looking at Daniel Levy and going, well, come on, mate, you're the chairman. You've been having all the control at Spurs. What are you doing with that? What are your ambitions for Spurs and trying to elevate them and push them forward on the pitch? Because off the pitch, clearly he's done a fantastic job, but on the pitch for a while, it has not been not been not been punching, even though they have the potential to punch. I'm not even saying you have to win things, you have to win Champions League or you have to win Premier League, but investing that money on the pitch and letting it show. You don't. Some players sometimes you buy them and you go, you don't even question the money that you spent on them because you go, yeah, they were clearly worth the money, worth every penny. No questions about the price tag. We don't even need to talk about the price tag. Whereas often with Spurs, we do go like, well, where's that money gone? That's 50 million gone on that
Yeah.
player, 60 million gone on that player, and you think to yourself, well, what an absolute waste. And I think there are some good investments in the Spurs squad. I think, like you said, Solanke, kudos. I think Xavi Simons for a potential future signing looks really, really good, and hopefully he can kick on and show that potential at Spurs. But for the here and now, I don't see it, and I haven't seen it for a while now, and I think it's just an indictment of where Spurs are at, where they're continuing to lose good players, and the replacements that are coming in are good, but not at the same level. And of course, that means you're going to regress on the football pitch.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because that feels like that relationship between Levy and Frank should work because I think probably the experience that Frank had at Brentford in terms of they were losing players, they were replacing them fantastically, and they were still able to play in a way that suited the players they had, despite losing really, really key players like Mbomo and Wissa, for example. And now they have Igor Thiago, who has had a fantastic season. And over the long term, that should be a relationship that works, where Levy is happy to let go of players for decent money when they need to, invest in the market shrewdly with sensible young signings instead of going out and making statement signings. And Frank should be able to work with that model and get those results. But I think saying that is a long term project and a long term relationship that needs to build. And one transfer window where it feels like Spurs did need a big jump up in quality, maybe hasn't paid off just yet. But yeah, over the long term, that the way that the manager and Levy work should work pretty in sync. And I think if you're looking at Frank being that Spurs manager, that should come into account as a long-term project, and maybe holds a little bit of weight of why they're not being too reactionary and sacking him, and that they want to. And fingers crossed, because I think clubs should be looking more long-term, that he would potentially stay around and get things back on track over a longer period, maybe.
Well, this is the thing, because I don't trust the higher ups at Spurs either, because obviously Levy was, we think at least, involved in the sacking of Ange, was involved in the hiring of Frank. Then Levy decides to leave in the summer, and then they bring in Paratici to be head of operations for football. But now he's leaving at the end of February, and so if they end up deciding to keep Thomas Frank, apparently Paratici is currently still in the role, so therefore might have an influence on that. And Spurs fans are saying, well, if he's leaving at the end of February, there's no reason why he should be involved. And then you're looking at it and going, who's actually making the decision at Spurs? And you just don't have a clue. And you think to yourself, similarly to Manchester United, we were discussing last week about who in there is actually set in their position, is an expert at what they're doing, knows what you're doing, and you can count on them to do a very good job. And I'm genuinely looking around and going, I don't have a clue. And obviously Spurs fans will have to maybe clue us up on that, about who they actually trust at the football club right now, because I'm looking at it and I'm going, I don't trust anyone really. And so I think that's probably why Thomas Frank is maybe still in the job, because do you want to just see out the season with him? Because who else are you going to bring in? Do you maybe think to yourself that because the higher-ups are here, not here, who really knows, that you think to yourself, okay, well, we don't really want them to be making a decision about the manager until we have some stability up there. And so you're just leaving the manager in and not really saying anything to the fans either. So it just feels like, I feel like I'm saying this almost like every week about so many different clubs. It just feels like a mess top to bottom. And I don't know who to blame. I don't know who is accountable. And I don't know who I should be calling for the axe for, because it's so muddled. You don't know who's got which fingers in which pies. And yeah, it's just a mess, really.
Yeah, and this I think with Spurs especially because I think we all know that Frank is a really good manager and did such an incredible job at Brentford. For him to come in, he hasn't really changed much. As in, like he hasn't come in and done any. He obviously they're playing a different style of football than Ange. I think that was expected for any manager who came in, but it's not. This one doesn't feel like it's clear that Frank and the way that he is trying to play is a really a massive issue. Yeah, there are tweaks that are needed. Um, but I just don't think Frank is the sort of manager who would be coming in and making an instant impact anyway. And I think if there's an expectation of that, why have you hired Thomas Frank, who is a long-term project manager? Really, he needs something to build. He needs to set up that all of the backroom data that he's so keen on. He needs to change the way the sort of scouting is done, and maybe he doesn't really have as much access to that at Spurs, considering the size of the club, as he would have done at Brentford. And all of those good things about Spurs, about Frank and his time at Brentford, he just isn't going to be able to do at Spurs. And then, like you say, either that's the wrong fit and the wrong appointment from the people above Frank, the people above Frank not doing their job in those things that Frank doesn't have access to, and maybe the reason to sack Frank is because he doesn't suit the system that he's come into, as opposed to he's the fault of why Spurs are playing badly. So yeah, it feels like it again, like we were saying with United and Chelsea, feels like an easy scapegoat for the manager. But there's so many possible situations in which there's not really much he could even do potentially.
I do find it interesting the reframing of the past and what people were saying at the time, because I think everyone at the time said Thomas Frank was a really exciting appointment, a manager that should improve Spurs and take them forward. But I think now people are going, well, it's just Brentford and the model they have, and anyone they have as the manager there is going to succeed. And I don't think that idea has been helped by the fact that Keith Andrews has done so well with Brentford so far this season, because the fact that they're challenging for Europe right now, which is absolutely crazy for a club the size of Brentford. But now you end up trying to question Frank and going similarly to someone like Graham Potter at Brighton, and going, is it just because of the surroundings that they had? Does the surroundings make the manager look better than they actually are? I think for me it shows the fact that the Spurs surroundings and the environment that they put their managers in isn't as good as some other clubs, and if it was, I think Thomas Frank could have done a better job. But I also am thinking to myself that maybe at the time there needed to be a little bit more cautiousness about the way we talked about what Thomas Frank was going to go out and do, because he has, looking just purely at points in the Premier League, he has improved Spurs, because they're only 10 points off in 16 games left of where they were last season. So they're going to probably exceed that this season. So therefore, technically, that is an improvement. But the football is not that fun to watch, and it's not that exciting for Spurs fans, and they're continuously losing at home. So then I come back to the question, are they actually as good as we think they are? Are they actually a top 10 side? Are they actually a side that's capable of competing for Europe? And honestly, I feel like such a fraud having a football podcast, because I just genuinely don't know anymore. Yeah. Help, Tobes?
Yeah, I think it's difficult with Spurs because it's so you can have such a long conversation about what they need to do long term, what needs to change on the club, but ultimately this season they do need a bit of a season to salvage. And are there any quick fixes? Are there any personnel changes? Are there any slight tweaks that they can do to their game at the moment to get them playing? And maybe that feels like where that conversation for Spurs should go, because ultimately we can talk about the quality of their squad, what their transfer policy is going to be like, but there's not going to be any drastic changes on that now. So what can they do on the pitch, if anything, to start picking up a few more results, and maybe something that we can take from their Champions League performances and from that win against Dortmund, and try and apply that into the Premier League, if that's even possible?
Yes, they can use the Champions League to help them out, because I think the performance against Dortmund in the week was good, was really, really good, was much better, much more of like what you want to see, and especially the fact that it was at home, so the Spurs fans were able to see that. I think basically I heard cheers and encouragement from the Spurs crowd pretty much for the entirety of that game. I didn't hear any of the negativity that I genuinely hear in a Premier League game, And maybe because it's a different competition, it's a different mindset, you can reframe the way you think about it and look about it in a more positive light. But I don't think they can do exactly the same in the Champions League that they do in the Premier League, because I think English teams they are stronger, they are faster, they are more physical than the teams in Europe, so they do have that advantage. So I do think that a midfield of Bergvall and Gray works well in the Champions League, and they're very good technical players. They can get around the pitch, they're quite strong. But in the Premier League, I think against majority teams, they probably get bullied in the middle of the park. So that's where you can see the potential of some of these young, exciting players, but they're not quite ready to bring a 7 or 8 performance on a weekly basis and be consistent. I think that's the issue right now, because they've got a squad of players they've got some really good young, exciting players, but the established pros aren't world beaters and can drag the young players up with them. And so as a result, they're kind of like in no man's land right now, in 14th place, of position we normally talk about, like with Crystal Palace being in no man's land. They're not in the relegation fight, but they're not competing for Europe either. And so what I think they need to do is, and I think the signing of Conor Gallagher was, you could argue, maybe similar to this, is I think they need to bring in players in the peak of the powers right now to try and raise that ceiling of the Spurs team. And so you hope that the players over time can, because they're young, you can bump up that floor, and then you can get a little bit more consistent performances. But I think for me, I'll just be going out and trying to sign as many good players as possible to improve the first team, and then hope that when players come back, to like Kulusevski, Madison, Bentancur, eventually, if he does make it back this season, that they can come in, and then you go, okay, when everyone is fit and everyone is available, we have a really good first 14, and the rest are some really good young exciting players, and then you kind of have a better idea of where Spurs are at. But the issue is, with Thomas Frank and the performances so far, is he going to get that time?
Yeah, and there is going to be 10, 9, 8 days left of the transfer window. They do have some time to go out and improve that quality. And I saw a rumour that they were linked with Curtis Jones, potentially, from Liverpool, which I think would probably be pretty good signing. I think it's the right sort of signing. Somebody who can carry the ball, pass the ball well, maybe a little bit more built than the sort of creative players they have in midfield at the moment. But yeah, I just don't know if they're going to be able to go out and get the quality that they need immediately. I think they need a left winger. For me, I think is the big one that they've needed since Son has gone. And I think Tell, Colomani, Odegaard, whoever plays on the left, I just don't think is good enough at the moment. Semenyo would have been great. Semenyo would have been really nice. Somebody who can play on both wings. Unfortunately, pipped to it by Man City. Yeah, I think that would have been the perfect signing for Spurs. But besides that, I'm not really too sure. And I'm not really too sure who would be available either. Maybe to get the best out of what they have at the moment, if hypothetically we say they can't go out and get anyone in the transfer window, could, like you said, they're playing a little bit slow out the back. They're really prone to mistakes, leading to shots and goals at the moment. They're second in the league for errors leading to shots and third for errors leading to goals. With those sort of question marks made about the midfield and the slowness of their play, could Thomas Frank use what he used at Brentford and going a little bit more direct be helpful for Spurs at the moment, especially with Solanke coming back as somebody who could be used as maybe a bit more of a target man?
Well, firstly on the errors, that's why I like everything for me circles back to Thomas Frank, because I'm thinking to myself, you're brought in to improve the defence. Are you actually improving the defence if the side has so many errors? We'll have to wait and see if he can try and eradicate that, because that was the thing that Ange Postecoglou also had an issue with. But Spurs at the time were also trying to play out the back and were doing so aggressively so that they're continuously just shooting themselves in the foot. They're not doing it that as often this season as they were last season, but they're still making lots of errors defensively. And so you think to yourself, that's the one thing that was one of your selling points. But the other selling point of Thomas Frank was the fact that he's meant to come in and be really good with young players and developing them. And we haven't necessarily seen too much of that either. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, the young players, can you go out and improve them? Like, can you make these defensive players less error prone than they have been previously? And again, that's another thing which I keep coming back to Thomas Frank on. And then I'm excited to see if he can get a tune out of Solanke. And I think he absolutely will, because to have that striker who can hold with the ball, can link up play, can switch things up a little bit, I think that will help Spurs, and I think he has been a massive miss so far because I think it was the Arsenal game in the derby which you really saw that the fact that Richarlison up front, yes, he got the goal, but it was how often is he going to score a goal like that from that far out, lobbing David Raya? You really want someone to hold someone up against the likes of Saliba and Gabriel, and there's so many centre backs who are physical right now, and Richarlison just can't do that. Colomwani is, I think, better at it, but still not great at it, and so I think that Solanke will come in and make a massive difference, but you just hope they don't over rely on him because he has just come back from a long time out injured, and the last thing you want is for him to get injured again because that could be that's the one injury that could just be the end of Spurs' season right there.
Yeah, and you'd hope with a player like Solanke would bring in Xavi Simons a little bit more, get the wingers into better positions quicker. I think is a key thing because it feels like with Spurs when they have that ball high, they're getting the wingers fairly isolated, but it feels like it's very wide, and I feel like the way I think they want their wingers to be is to be inverted and a little bit more narrow. Whereas if you've got Solanke, like you said, somebody who can hold it, wait for those wingers to make those runs, and get in behind a little bit more because they've got a lot of pace, Spurs, and it feels like they're not really utilising that with like your Koulibaly, Kudus, Odobert, all very, very quick, but by the time they get the ball, defences have already sat back and feel fairly comfortable against them. So yeah, I think that will be something that will give Spurs a little bit of a push at least in the short term. And yeah, with their upcoming Premier League fixtures,
Oh my
besides
god.
Burnley at home on this weekend, which you'd hope could be fairly easy for results, their four after that are yeah, it's the test, isn't it? These ones.
Yeah, it is the February from hell. It is Manchester City at home, Manchester United away, Newcastle United at home, and then Arsenal at home in the derby in February. And with those upcoming fixtures, I am thinking to myself that are Spurs actually more likely to get points out of those results than they are if they face sides at the bottom of the table who are sitting back in a low block and trying to tell Spurs, okay, fine, you find some creativity and you try and break us down. Maybe they might actually do better. They've already beaten Manchester City once this season. They drew 2-2 with Manchester United. I mean, obviously, they don't want to talk about that Arsenal performance. Maybe a chance to make things right against Arsenal this time at home. But yeah, it is. It is a dreadful month. And then I think that's the thing that you're looking at going forward because they're on 27 points right now from 22 games. Like I said, Burnley away. I mean, if Tottenham don't win, say they lose to Burnley away, does Thomas Frank even get that month of February? I mean, yeah, go on. I'll just throw you that question. Do you think you'll get that month of February if you lose to Burnley away?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I think if Thomas Frank goes, they're going to bring in an interim. I mean, I think they'll probably try their best to get Xabi Alonso. I don't think he'll go. They'll get an interim in, and then it will probably be somebody like Poch or Glasner. I think next season would be the two. Poch after the World Cup of America, Glasner saying he's not going to be staying feels like a fairly appropriate appointment. I think Glasner feels more Spursy than United manager. I think that makes a little bit more sense, but nonetheless, I think they're realistically going to be looking at an interim, and then you have to think short term with an interim. You have to think, is bringing somebody else in on a short term basis maybe going to help their results at the end of this season? In those tough fixtures, probably not, but overall for the rest of the season, possibly. I think they maybe would be hoping for that new manager bounce, something a little bit fresh, and because I think the morale after losing away to Burnley would be so big that the rest of the season, yeah, in the Prem anyway, I think that loss to Burnley is like, right, season feels almost done in that sense in the Prem, and it would be such a focus on the Champions League, and it depends how kind they want to be. Do they feel like they want to give Frank the rest of the Champions League season because he got them into the knockouts, which I think they probably will. I don't know. Football's normally not that kind, is it? So I think after a Burnley away loss, he would go. Yeah, I actually think they would, and I don't want them to do that, and I don't want him to go because I think he's a great manager, and I think long term he's the right manager for Spurs to fix a lot of their issues. But after a loss like that, yeah, a lot of the faith just goes, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think if you lost on the weekend against Burnley, I think they will sack him. I'm just going to go out and say it. Do you know what? I'm looking at the options and I'm thinking of who they could get in right now. And I think there aren't too many managers who are out of a job who could do fantastic things with Spurs right now. And so, considering the fact that they spent £10 million to try and get Thomas Frank out of Brentford in the first place, I think I would just give him the season. The season is already a write-off, so what's the point of bringing someone in on interim just so you can feel good about yourselves and then hire someone permanently in the summer, which I think is what they would do if they sank Frank now. So I'd just be giving him the season and just say, right, we want to know. We already know what's happened in the League Cup. We already got eliminated in Newcastle. We already know what's happened in the FA Cup. Got eliminated in the first round. Well, the first round that Spurs were in the third round against Villa. We want to see what you're going to do in the Champions League because you have a chance of maybe qualifying immediately in the top 8. If not, they should definitely be in the 16 following and make it to that first round of qualifying. And then we'll see where you are at the end of the season in the league. And then we can evaluate. It's probably going to be negative. You're probably going to get the boot. But at least we have a whole season because what's the point of sacking him now if you don't have the manager who you think is you're going to give a 3 or 4 year contract to, and then you hope is going to be the one to change things around for Spurs? If you don't have that manager ready, lined up, then I would just keep Thomas Frank to the end of the season, even though it's probably going to be boring football, even though it's probably going to be more results similar to this. And you know what? Maybe he turns it around. Maybe they go on this miraculous run. But in my opinion, that's probably not going to happen. It might get slightly better, I think. But yeah, with the fixtures coming up in February especially, I just think to myself, the season in the league, I think, for Spurs is probably going to be over come the end of February and going into March. And I think at that point, like, you can sack Frank maybe 2 or 3 games before the end of the season if you know it's over. You don't need to put the fans through that. But honestly, yeah, unless you have the guy ready to go, I would just keep him to the end of the season. I don't see the point in sacking him, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't really see the point in doing that. I think they will, but I think it will be pointless. And I think, to be honest, come by the end of February, I can't remember when the Champions League round. I don't think Spurs are going to get further than the round of 16 in the Champions League. Sorry, they might. No, actually, yeah, I think if they get to the round of 16, based on if they automatically qualify or they win that qualifying fixture, I think whoever they get in the round of 16, they will struggle against, probably go out. Their Premier League season and a race for Europe, I think, will be gone by the time that Arsenal game comes round. And then, yeah, it is either having that interim or Frank. Is there going to be any difference? Probably not. And yeah, it's come at a really, really bad time for them. A really, really bad time. Because you think maybe if they had a run of easy fixtures, they could build some momentum and maybe at least have some sort of belief going to the end of the season. But yeah, I think after these next 5 games, it's just maybe it'll be better in a way because then you can be like, well, the season's done. So,
But I'll be honest, I think Spurs fans are already thinking the season's already over. If we're being brutally honest about it, but I also agree. I think that even if there was easier fixtures, Spurs have struggled in those easier fixtures anyway. So there's actually really no saving grace when you think about it, apart from hopefully Kulusevski and Maddison are back soon-ish and can make some sort of difference. But yeah, I think it might be similar to Ange last season. If Ange didn't have the Europa League, would he have been sacked much earlier on in the season? Yeah, I think absolutely. I think as soon as they got knocked out of the Europa League, I think he probably would have got the sack. But is the Champions League keeping Thomas Frank in the job at the moment? You could potentially argue that, and maybe who knows? Maybe they could get a decent draw in the round of 16 if they qualify automatically, which then mean they end up in the quarterfinals. And then you're thinking to yourself, oh, who knows what could happen? Maybe we could go on another run like when Spurs got to the final of the Champions League in 2019. But that was a situation where Spurs were bad in the league, but they were like what, 5th or 6th? Like it wasn't as bad as they are now. So I just to put it out there in case anyone is wondering it, I in no way, shape or form think Spurs are going to win the Champions League. I'll be very surprised if they make the quarterfinals. I'll be honest. I don't think they'll make it out of the round of 16 if they were to get there. So yeah, maybe it is the Champions League which keeps Thomas Frank in the job, but similar to Ange, I don't think that should keep him in the job. But now I'm thinking about it, like, what if he does actually like make a semi-final or a final? Then I don't know. Spurs are just so incredibly confusing, like many football teams and clubs right now.
Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about Spurs making semi-final or the final of the Champions League. I think even
I'm
their
glad you said
results in
it.
the Champions League I think even their results in the Champions League so far can only say so much. They had a very easy draw in this group stage. Their only tough game coming up against PSG, who they gave a good game to, but they did still ultimately concede 5 goals and lose. So it's how much can you even take from that? And again in the Champions League, a few disappointing draws. Draws against Bodo Glimt. They had another early draw against a team who weren't the toughest potential. Was it Villarreal, or am I making that up?
I can't remember it. Sorry.
Not too sure, but they haven't had even like an incredible run in the Champions League, despite being in the top 8 at the moment, with a few teams behind them with a game in hand. Um, so yeah, I think even the Champions League isn't much for them to go on unless they get into the round of 16 and Frank's still there and he produces an amazing performance in that at least gives them something to hold on to. But I'm not too hopeful of that really, and to be honest, I don't even think Spurs fans are.
No, I definitely don't think they are. But I mean, they say it's the hope that kills you, don't they? Just to give my thoughts on it, in terms of potential replacements, if they were to part ways with Thomas Frank, like I said, I would keep him into the end of the season. And I'm looking at like the list of candidates, and obviously you've got like the Robbie Keane, or maybe I think that's more on the interim basis. He's one of the favourites. Then you got like the Xavi Hernandez. Did you say Xabi Alonso for you?
I mean, Xabi Alonso, I think, would be the one that they would go for and makes the most
Mm.
sense. Whether he would take that, I think, is the question.
Yeah, I think there might be. I don't know what's going on with Liverpool. I think there might be a chance he might be holding out for that one potentially. Then you got likes of Oliver Glasner, who you said as well, Ruben Amorim, I think Marcus Silva. I think unfortunately for Marcus Silva, the Spurs job, I'm taking Thomas Frank from a mid-table club and then elevating him to Spurs. I think the Silva path is too similar now, and something that it would have been instead of Thomas Frank, not like immediately after Thomas
Yeah.
Frank. I think you might have to do something different. And looking at the names, I think I would probably go for Mauricio Pochettino in the summer. I think it would lead to you having to wait for him to finish the World Cup campaign with USA, but I think that could be worth it. And I've spoken about this before, that if there's a manager in the World Cup who's managing a team in the World Cup and you're waiting for them, as long as you believe they're the right man for the job, I think it's worth waiting and potentially delaying some summer plans for a couple of weeks, because then you can make up for it in a few windows time in the summer, because hopefully they're going to be the right man and still be there at the club. And I know they say you should probably never go back, but I think recently we've seen David Moyes go back to Everton, and he's done an okay job so far. I think it's probably been a year since he's been back at Everton, roughly. And I think that's going well so far. He knows the club, and it'd be a bit more of a feel-good factor back in the Spurs. Will he take him back to? Will he help him win the Premier League? Don't think so, but I think right now, I think it's, can Spurs get back into the Champions League through the league performances, and maybe win a trophy here or there along the way. That would be quite nice, I think. So yeah, I think for me, I'd go Pochettino.
Yeah, that feels like the one that I think will happen. I think they will do that. It's somebody who I think will probably get them playing more consistently. It will be a little bit of, feel good for the fans with Poch back, and I think even when he was sacked, they weren't like awful. They had a drop, but it wasn't like it was a complete fallout and they were terrible and they had to get rid of him. It was probably a fairly difficult decision for them at the time. So it's not like one of those where it didn't work before, it's not going to work this time. Because when Poch was there, it was probably the last time it was really working for Spurs. So why not try it again?
Yeah, it was the last time that I think that Spurs fans had absolutely everything. They had a team that was doing well on the pitch, and the play style was really good, and they had a manager who they could call their own in a way, because I think obviously
Yeah,
Mourinho and Conte, they're obviously heavily associated with other Premier League clubs as well. I think Pochettino, because he was at Southampton, is someone they could say like, no, this is our elite manager rather than someone else's as well, and someone else who's just here for a payday. So yeah,
mm.
I think that's everything about Spurs. I mean, God, they've got so many issues. We haven't missed any issues for them, have we?
I don't think so. No, I mean who knows, if they lose to Burnley on the weekend, there might be another episode on them after Frank gets sacked. So, yeah.
Yeah. And at this point, would you rather just rip off the Band-Aid, or would you rather him plod along slowly limping till the end of the season? Spurs fans, let us know in the comments below. Thank you everyone for watching this one, and we'll see you next week.